Good day, everyone. I hope you guys have an amazing day. So what I'm going to do today, I'll be briefly talking about migrating process builders to flows. I might have talked about it in the past or briefly touched about it, but I thought I might as well demo a few things and just, it's an opportunity to talk about how I feel and how we done it, right? So from the latest release, right? In the latest release, Salesforce will not allow you to create new process builder. So what that means is that you cannot use process builders anymore. I mean, at least you cannot create a new one. But you might have an org where you have an existing process builders, right, which you wanted to migrate to close. Now, it seems pretty simple. You know, Salesforce has given existing tool. You can click on that. Does the job. It is okay for a simple process builders, right? I mean, if you don't have too much of complications, you can use the migrate the flow, but it's not pretty straightforward, as I say. Okay, so I wanted to talk about a couple of scenarios, right? What happens if you have a simple process uh, builder? What happens if you have a complex process builders, right? And uh, can you really trust migrate to flow tool to do the job, right? That's all I wanted to address in this video. So the first thing first, right? Let's take an example of a process builder. So if I go to process builder, I've just created one process builder, but I just can expand on it and then we can talk using that. So let's say you have a process builder in place, a very simple process builder. Like for instance, I have this one, right? So what this process builder will do, it will, based on account source, if the account source is something, it will create a task, and if the account source is something else, it will do something, right? And then it will schedule. There are some scheduled tasks attached to it as well. Okay, pretty simple process builder, nothing fancy, right? Now you can use migrate to flow tool to convert, and so when you do that, the flow does pretty good job in doing so. Okay, so this is a simple flow, a simple process builder. So what I'll do, I'll migrate to flow, and let's see. Um, okay, so I can say all of this stuff. Okay, so now here is the one problem we can see, right? Schedule actions are not supported to by the migrate to flow. If you migrate, only immediate actions are migrated. So this is the one thing you need to consider, right? Now you might have different options in place, and if you try to migrate it, and you might get this message, then unfortunately your logic needs to be changed, right? So you might have to go back to the design board and say, okay, that you involve your perhaps your Salesforce architect to talk about it and see which way you can design it, right? It's not always the case, right? I mean, I do appreciate the fact that Salesforce says, hey, use the tool, but use the tool does not always work, unfortunately, right? And also one of the thing, okay, let's migrate this anyways, right? Let's talk about it. Okay. See, we can't even migrate it because the chatter post action is not even supported, right? Okay. So what I'll do, let me create a quick dirty process build. Okay. What I'll do, um, I will actually delete this one. Yeah. I don't want this one. So, and I will also delete this one, right? Okay. Now, I don't know what is this. Okay. Okay, so this is pretty simple. We can do that. Okay, now what I'll do, so what I've done, right, I've removed the chatter stuff from it just to demonstrate what happens if you wanted to convert to the flows, right? So like I said, certain actions are not supported using convert to flow tools, right? So you have to pay attention to that. That's one of the reasons why I wanted to demonstrate this chatter one, so that you will know that some of the functionality is not available. So if you have, so let's say you have something similar, right? And you wanted to migrate, and the flow, you know, gives this error. So obviously you cannot use this tool. So what's the best way? So the best way is you need to understand how your process builder work, and you have to manually migrate it to the flow. That's the best way, in my opinion. Yes, it is a time-consuming process, but the advantage is you will get an opportunity to work on building a better version of Flow. Because I've seen process builders, right? I've seen a lot of process builders. Some of the process builders are very horribly written, right? I sometimes, I can't really stop nagging about this, but I have seen so much of worse development happening in the Salesforce than any other technology I worked in my career. I mean, I've done briefly touched with SAP. I worked with .NET Framework. I worked with, other tools in the past. But in Salesforce, I've seen the flows getting extremely poorly written, the process builders getting extremely poorly written. It could be the reason, right? Because the Salesforce says, hey, anybody can come and develop it. That's the whole crux of the problem, because anybody cannot come and develop it. You need a skilled programmer to build something, right? If it involves the technology stuff, right? Because functional people, I mean, there's no offense. I don't mean to offend anyone, but I just wanted to make my opinion, right? Because obviously we cannot always hide behind political correctness, right? So there's a misconception among the functional people that they can write very good flows. Some of them can, but most of them I've seen they can't, because they make a spaghetti of mess. And then, when it comes to, large data volume and other stuff, it just cracks. I have so much of experience, dealing with such kind of mess. Last year in New Zealand, I had an opportunity to correct one flow, right? It was a very big project. It was a COVID project. I don't want to get into detail, but just, and it was a mess. The flow was shite. I mean, it was horribly written. I mean, and we were getting a lot of people into the country, and the flow needs to perform like 10K, 20K people, and the flow was handling just few thousand an hour, and we were expecting like at least 20 to 30,000 people an hour entering our shows, and it was horrible. So I have to migrate the stuff into code, right, to make it. So I brought down, numbers like, 3,000, or I mean, I don't know, I don't exactly remember. It's like 5,000 an hour to, 5,000 in 5 minutes using code update. So you can imagine how pathetic the flow was. It was horribly written. It was not written by a programmer. So that's the first thing, right? So that's why I'm saying, right, when you do something like this, right, just take it as an opportunity to, write a better flow. Okay. So let's take an example of this one. Okay. Enough of ranting. I'm sorry. I just sometimes, it's very frustrating, right? Okay, chatter post. For some reason, no, okay, you know what? Oh, show more. Oh, okay. This guy. This guy, is that a chatter post? Okay, you know what? Let me clone this boy. Yeah? I just say new process. Okay, version of the current process. Let me clone this. I'll just make a spaghetti mess flow just to demonstrate, right? And I don't want to activate it. Okay, I delete it. And this one. And I will delete it. Okay, and what I'll do, I will add an action. I'll just create a record. Uh, Create a contact, right? Just create a spaghetti of stuff. Okay, what is it called? Add contact. I'm just trying to create some, just jargon process builder just to demonstrate some of the stuff, right? Okay, account source 3. As you can see, that the naming convention is shite as well, but um, Okay, I'll show the trade show, whatever, right? And let me create another record, yeah, because I wanted to demonstrate what it looks like and an opportunity you have. So contact, right? So what is called? Just put trade, yeah, whatever, trade, sure, okay, and also activate, confirm, right? Okay, I'll go here, right? So as you can see, what I've done, I created a spaghetti process builder, right? Which is okay, and then I'll go here and I'll just migrate to flow. Okay, now seems okay. So I'll select all of this nodes because you'll get an opportunity to select which node you want to migrate. I mean, if you're migrating it, might as well migrate the entire stuff, right? Where you wanted to pick and choose and complicate your life, right? So if you're gonna use this tool, right, might as well migrate everything. Okay. So all right, it's gonna do that. Now, okay, so there is a testing. Okay, now is it done? Testing flow builder. Okay. Now, look at this flow. Yeah? What do you think? This looks like an interesting flow, right? I mean, now if I code reviewing this flow, I will say, mate, this is not going to pass the code review. End of story. Okay, the problem is, right? I'm looking at from a developer perspective, right? I'm not looking at from a functional perspective. Okay, so we got the three nodes which does the same freaking things. Create record, create record, create record. Yeah, it does the create record, but just fine. Okay, let's look at this one. Which record is it? Okay, it's a task. Okay, I can excuse that. This is a separate process. Contact, contact. Now you see the problem here? There's a duplicate information here, contact. I mean, and then it just accepts one param, right? So obviously we have a node which is duplicated. Yes, a slight change in the input. I would rather prefer this to be combined to have one option. Maybe move this into a subflow, right? Because I prefer the flow should have a separation of concern. So it violates at first it violates the principle of the code should do a single responsibility principle means the flow should be responsible for just one action. Here it does create a task, create a contact, which is not really great. So I will move this create task to separate flow. Depending upon the complexity, but let's assume that along with the create task, you have something else going on, right? So I'll move that into separate flow, a subflow. Create contact, trade show, separate subflow, right? It should be a one flow, a subflow which does the contact update stuff, right? So that then you can hook the subflow here, the same subflow here with the variable name or whatever stuff, and with error handling inside the subflow, right? And yeah, now that comes to my another. There is no error handling here, right? Obviously, I don't like to see like you need to click here. What happened to default path? What happens if it crashes, right? You need to maybe if you have a logger framework, stuck it in the logger, right? There are a lot of things the converter flow won't do for you, right? Because I write a lot of flows, right? I write a lot of flows. I write a lot of code. You know, the kind of flows I write. Usually, the kind of project I'm involved in, that's very complex. The medical project I'm doing, right, where you need to write a lot of flows, and what I've done, I've created a template, and I'm inheriting from the template. Like I try to mimic the interface, inheritance concept, and then one flow does something, and the same flow, when you pass a parameter, behaves something different. And we use a lot of subflows and use error handling and then even we use the platform event flows, which subscribed to a platform event. So there are a lot of interesting stuff going on. Uh, the project where I'm involved. So if this kind of flow is just a mess, right? I mean, I appreciate the fact this is a very simple flow. So what I'm trying to say here is that if you wanted to use that process builder to flow, which is great. I mean, use it by all means. At least it will give you a skeleton structure. But just don't keep the structure as such. Take it as an opportunity to improve on it, right? At least, if you're on the time crunch, I understand that. But still, even if you're on the time crunch, how long it takes to migrate this to a subflow? Half an hour? Maybe an hour? That's not too much, right? We build super complex flows in like 4 to 5 hours, right? But like, 15 nodes, right? It took me like 5 hours to build it with subflows, with different error handling, you know. And I do appreciate that some people have different speed of working, but just in this case, just an hour. Okay, let's see. Let me give you a benefit of doubt. 2 hours shouldn't take more than 2 hours to tidy up this flow, right? So yeah, I mean, take it as an opportunity, right? So this is if I'm talking, this is a very simple flow. Now you might have scenario where you have a lot of nodes, so and it can become a spaghetti mess. So the last thing you should be doing is to add extra tech depth to your org, which is not really great, right? So obviously you might have a technical architect, or even if you're a technical architect, right? I would highly encourage you, to look at the flow and take it as an opportunity to see if you can do a modular based approach, right? Because it's obviously um, you know it's good to have a separation of concern. But that being said, too many subflows are not good as well, right? So you need to find a right balance. So yeah, so for simple flows, it's fine. I mean, it will does the job. I mean, if you have 1 2 nodes, you don't really have to worry. But something like this, right? If there is a duplicacy, right, it's better to move that into subflow, right? So that's my opinion because the same subflow can be used elsewhere, perhaps in other flow, right? And if it's a complex flow, then you might have to see how you design it, right? Perhaps using this tool may not be a great option if it's very complex, like as you've seen, some of the stuff you can't migrate, you know. So perhaps it's good to design from the scratch. And I do get it. Like you might have time crunch, like I said. So see what works for you. That's all I can say, right? So I can't tell you what's the best way or what's the bad way because what works for me may not works for you guys, right? So you guys need to find a balance. If you're a Salesforce architect, I just encourage you to find a balance and see what works for you guys, right? So so yeah, that's one thing I just wanted to mention, right? Because lately I've been trying to migrate some of the process builders, and I'm seeing a lot of issues with the tool. So what I'm doing is that I'm just trying to understand a process builder, draw a quick diagram in a lucid chart to see, okay, this is the way I wanted to do it, and then come up with a design pattern. And sometimes I don't use complete flows. I use invocable apex because of based on performance. And then yeah, I mean, in case by case, right? Sometimes you might have to use a code, right? Maybe what might happen is that you might realize process builder is not a good way to go. You might better off using a trigger. So yeah, so that's something I would highly encourage you to work with your designer or architect to see how that goes, right? So that's all I wanted to cover in this episode. And my apologies if my rant was offensive. That was not my intention. My intention was just to make a point, right? Because I've seen so much of mess. I have lots of years experience in this platform, not just in Salesforce, right? I've experienced in different technologies, so I know what I'm talking. Right? I know my skill very well. So, and I often encourage people to write better code. That's one of my main interests, to encourage people to write better code. Right? People make mistakes. That's perfectly fine because we should make mistakes. That's how we improve, right? But if you keep on doing the same mistake, then that's not really great. That's all I'm getting at. And and if you're a functional consultant, right, take it as an opportunity to understand the design pattern, understand from a tech standpoint, right? Yes, Salesforce has a low code tool, but low code tool, will bring a a low code tool shouldn't turn out to a low quality output, right? The low code tool means you don't have to worry about writing code if you're not comfortable with code, but the design principle still holds the same, right? Like single responsibility principle is still the same, right? You write code, or you do that using Flow, or you do that using Omni Studio. It makes no difference, right? It's still the same concept. So I would encourage you to at least understand the design pattern, try to see how stuff can be built. Error handling is very important for me, because if I see any flow, right, with no error handling, I don't let that go through I straight away reject it in a code review. My code reviews are very tough. Usually people who works with me, they know that the code don't pass easily, right? Because the reason why I make it tough, because I don't want bugs coming from the production later because of something we missed, right? And it's really very annoying when the stuff gets returned from production, and very difficult to debug, and you might risk a data issue there, which is a bigger problem, right? So I often enforce a very strict coding standard, so that we make sure that we put the high quality stuff to the prod. So yeah, that's my approach. That's the way I work. So yeah. So that being said, I hope you guys have an amazing Wednesday. Adios.